The cleaner screamed when she realized the aircraft was moving with no one in the cockpit. 340 feet above the ground, aircraft N77896, an Airbus A320, was climbing steadily with all systems operational, but the pilot's seat was empty. The cleaner had boarded to prepare the cabin for the next flight, only to discover the impossible, an aircraft flying itself with no human at the controls. My name is Richard Harmon. After 27 years as a senior accident investigator for the NTSB, I've documented hundreds of aviation incidents, from minor landing gear failures to catastrophic crashes. But in all my years studying the complex machinery of modern flight, I've never encountered a case that defies explanation quite like what happened on November 8, 2019 at Millard Airport in Nebraska. What began as routine pre-flight procedures would evolve into one of aviation's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, one that the FAA, the NTSB, and even the Department of Defense have struggled to explain. The official reports remain classified, but through interviews with ground crew, air traffic controllers, and maintenance personnel, I've pieced together a narrative that challenges our understanding of modern aviation safety protocols and perhaps even reality itself. It was 5:38 in the morning. Dawn hadn't broken yet over the flat Nebraska landscape. The temperature was just below freezing, with light fog hugging the tarmac. Captain Thomas Whitfield, 53, had arrived for his pre-flight checks. A veteran pilot with over 19,000 flight hours, Whitfield was known among his colleagues as meticulous and by the book. His first officer for the day, Sandra Reeves, was delayed by traffic and had called ahead to say she'd be approximately 15 minutes late. Ground crew member Elliot Peterson was the first person to see Captain Whitfield that morning. He seemed completely normal, Peterson would later tell investigators. We even joked about the Cornhuskers game the night before. Nothing seemed off. Security footage confirms Whitfield swiping his credentials at 5:42 a.m. to access the tarmac, and again at 5:45 a.m. to enter the aircraft, a 12-year-old Airbus A320 operated by Midwest Connect Airways. What happened in the next 17 minutes remains at the center of this mystery. At 6:02 a.m., air traffic controller Melissa Donovan received a call from the aircraft. The voice on the radio was calm, professional, unmistakably Whitfield's according to those who knew him. He requested permission to begin taxiing procedures, stating that his first officer had arrived and they were ready to begin the pre-flight sequence. Donovan, finding nothing unusual about the request, granted permission. November 77896, cleared to taxi to runway 34, she responded, following standard protocol. The aircraft began to move. The movements were smooth, precise, nothing to suggest any mechanical issues. Ground radar tracked the Airbus as it made its way toward the runway, following the exact taxiway path that would be expected for that morning's departure. But then, something happened that would send shivers down the spines of everyone involved in the subsequent investigation. At 6:12 a.m., First Officer Sandra Reeves finally arrived at the terminal, rushing toward the gate where she expected to board her flight. She was approximately 24 minutes late due to an accident on Highway 370 that had backed up traffic for miles. As she hurried through the terminal, she glanced out the window and froze in her tracks. There, clearly visible through the large terminal windows, was her aircraft, already taxiing toward the runway. Reeves immediately called ground control. "This is First Officer Reeves," she said, her voice tight with confusion. "Why is N77896 moving? I haven't boarded yet." There was a long pause on the radio. "We have confirmation that you're aboard," came Donovan's puzzled reply. "Captain Whitfield confirmed full crew complement approximately 10 minutes ago." "That's impossible," Reeves insisted. "I'm standing in the terminal watching my aircraft taxi without me." The timestamp on the security footage showing Reeves standing at the terminal window while simultaneously her aircraft moved on the tarmac would become one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in the investigation that followed. Donovan immediately contacted the aircraft. "November 77896, please confirm crew status." The response came back in Whitfield's voice, calm and unperturbed. "Ground, this is N77896. Full crew aboard, continuing taxi to runway 34. By now, Donovan was genuinely alarmed. She asked for Supervisor Marcus Holloway to join her at the control station as she once again addressed the aircraft. N77896, we have visual confirmation that First Officer Reeves is still in the terminal building. Please confirm who is in the cockpit with you. There was no response. Donovan repeated her call, this time with more urgency in her voice. Still nothing but silence from the aircraft that continued its steady path toward the runway. Holloway immediately issued an air-ground stop for all other aircraft and ordered emergency vehicles to intercept N77896 before it could reach the runway. But it was too late. The Airbus had already positioned itself at the threshold of runway 34. N77896, hold position immediately. Do not, repeat, do not attempt takeoff, Holloway commanded over the radio. What happened next defies explanation. The aircraft began its takeoff roll. Smooth, coordinated, perfectly executed. The Airbus accelerated down the runway exactly as it would under normal operations. The ground proximity sensors showed the landing gear retracting at precisely the right moment. The aircraft climbed at the optimal angle of attack. Everything was textbook perfect, except for one crucial detail. According to First Officer Reeves, who was still standing in the terminal, half of the required flight crew wasn't on board. By now, airport management had been alerted to the situation. Emergency protocols were activated, and the regional air defense sector was notified of a potential hijacking in progress. 2 F-16s from the Nebraska Air National Guard were scrambled and would intercept the aircraft within 20 minutes if it continued its flight path. But before military intervention became necessary, something even more bizarre occurred. At approximately 6:18 a.m., with the aircraft having reached an altitude of just over 300 feet, its transponders suddenly changed modes, broadcasting an emergency code. Seconds later, all radio contact with the aircraft ceased. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching from the ground and on radar screens, the aircraft executed a perfect banking turn and began heading back toward the airport. Air Traffic Controller Donovan, now joined by 3 other controllers and airport management staff, repeatedly tried to establish communication with the aircraft. N77896, please respond. N77896, if you can hear us, squawk ident. The aircraft's transponder briefly flashed the identification response, confirming that someone was receiving their transmissions, but no voice came over the radio. The Airbus lined itself up with the runway and began a textbook approach for landing. Emergency vehicles positioned themselves along the runway, their lights flashing in the early morning fog. Fire crews prepared for the worst. Police officers with rifles took positions, operating under the assumption that the aircraft might have been hijacked. At 6:29 a.m., the Airbus touched down smoothly on runway 34, its reverse thrusters engaging at precisely the right moment, its spoilers deploying to kill lift. The aircraft decelerated normally, and then, instead of taxiing to a remote area as would be protocol for a suspected hijacking, it returned directly to Gate 7, the exact gate from which it had departed 27 minutes earlier. As the aircraft came to a complete stop at the gate, the engines powered down normally. The aircraft's auxiliary power unit engaged, as it should, when transitioning from engine power to ground power. Every system functioned exactly as designed. For several tense minutes, no one approached the aircraft. The emergency response team maintained their positions, uncertain what they might find inside. Finally, after the aircraft had been stationary for 11 minutes with no communication from the cockpit, Airport Security Coordinator James Witham made the decision to approach. Led by 4 armed officers, a team including Witham, a paramedic, and an aircraft mechanic slowly approached the Airbus. The aircraft sat motionless, its engines ticking as they cooled in the morning air. Standard procedure dictated that they wait for the flight crew to open the doors from inside. When this didn't happen after several minutes, the mechanic, Trevor Holcomb, used his emergency access codes to open the forward cabin door from the outside. As the door swung open and the air stairs extended, the team braced themselves for whatever or whoever they might find inside. What they discovered would haunt them for years to come. The cabin was empty. Completely, utterly empty. No passengers, which was expected, as this was a positioning flight to pick up passengers at another airport, no flight attendants, and most disturbingly, no sign of Captain Whitfield. The cockpit door was open. Inside, the controls showed no signs of struggle or unusual activity. The pilot's logbook was open on the center console, with Whitfield's neat handwriting documenting the beginning of the pre-flight checks. His signature was halfway complete, as if he had been interrupted mid-stroke. His pen lay on the page, having left a small ink blot where it had been dropped. The first officer's seat was, as expected, unoccupied, but the captain's seat was empty as well. Captain Thomas Whitfield had vanished. His flight bag was still there. His jacket hung on the back of his seat. His half-finished cup of coffee, still warm to the touch, sat in the cup holder. The autopilot was not engaged. The aircraft system showed that manual control inputs had been used throughout the entire 17-minute flight, from taxi to takeoff to landing. Someone or something had flown that aircraft, but there was no one aboard. The initial search of the aircraft revealed nothing unusual beyond the captain's inexplicable absence. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indications of violence or forced entry. All doors and hatches had been secured from the inside. The lavatory was unoccupied. The cargo hold was empty and locked. Security footage from the airport showed the aircraft taxiing, taking off, and landing, but no external cameras had a view of the cockpit windows clear enough to confirm or deny whether anyone was actually at the controls. The investigation that followed would become one of the most thorough in aviation history. The aircraft was impounded and subjected to extensive forensic examination. Every inch of the cabin and cockpit was dusted for fingerprints, swabbed for DNA, and scrutinized for any evidence that might explain what had happened. The results were disturbing in their normalcy. Whitfield's fingerprints were found exactly where you'd expect them, on the yoke, the throttle controls, his logbook, his coffee cup. There were no unexplained fingerprints, no signs of any other person having been in the cockpit. The aircraft's flight recorders, both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, were removed and analyzed. This is where the mystery deepened even further. The flight data recorder showed completely normal operation. Every control input, every system function appeared consistent with a routine flight conducted by an experienced pilot. The aircraft had performed exactly as designed. But the cockpit voice recorder told a different, more chilling story. For the first 6 minutes of the recording, everything seemed normal. Captain Whitfield could be heard going through his pre-flight checklist, occasionally murmuring to himself as he verified different systems, standard behavior for a pilot preparing an aircraft. Then, at 5:51 a.m., the recording captured a sound that none of the investigators could readily identify. It was described variously as a low hum, a fluctuating tone, or similar to electrical interference, but somehow more structured. After this sound, which continued for approximately 42 seconds, Whitfield's voice changed subtly. Though voice analysis confirmed it was still him speaking, his cadence became more measured, his tone flatter. He continued the pre-flight checks, but now with an almost mechanical precision. At 5:57 a.m., the recording captured Whitfield saying something that sent chills through the investigation team. "They are coming through the seams. The sky is wrong today." There was no response from anyone else. No other voice was captured on the recording. At 5:59 a.m., Whitfield's voice said clearly, "I understand what is required." And then, most disturbing of all, at 6:01 a.m., just before contacting ground control to request taxi clearance, the captain's voice said, "I am not alone in this skin." After this statement, the cockpit voice recorder captured only routine radio communications with air traffic control, the normal sounds of the aircraft's operation, and, occasionally, very faintly in the background, the same unidentifiable humming tone. Nowhere in the recording was there any indication of struggle, surprise, or distress. There was no sound of the captain getting up from his seat, no evidence of another person entering the cockpit, no unusual noises that might suggest what had happened to him. It was as if Captain Thomas Whitfield had simply ceased to exist between one moment and the next, while the aircraft continued to operate as though he were still at the controls. 4 days into the investigation, another disturbing development occurred. Evelyn Rodriguez, a member of the overnight cleaning crew, boarded the aircraft which was still being held in a secure hangar at Millard Airport. She had not been briefed on which aircraft to clean and had accidentally been given access to the restricted area. According to security footage, Rodriguez entered the aircraft at 2:17 a.m. At 2:41 a.m., hangar security was alerted by the sound of screaming coming from inside the Airbus. When security personnel reached the aircraft, they found Rodriguez in a state of extreme distress. After being sedated by medical staff, she was able to explain what had caused her panic. "I was cleaning the cockpit," she stated in her official interview. "Everything was normal. I was wiping down the instrument panel when I noticed the captain's logbook was open. I wasn't going to touch it, but I glanced at it because it was right there. The signature." At this point, Rodriguez became agitated again, and it took several minutes for interviewers to calm her. "The signature was completing itself," she finally continued. "The pen was moving on its own, finishing the signature that had been cut off midway. I watched it happen. There was no one there, but the pen moved, scratching across the paper." Rodriguez's statement was initially dismissed as the product of an overwrought imagination, perhaps influenced by rumors that had begun to circulate among airport staff. However, when investigators checked the logbook, they made a chilling discovery. The signature, which had previously been incomplete, just Thomas Witt with an ink blot where the pen had been dropped, was now fully formed. Thomas Whitfield, written in what handwriting experts would later confirm was consistent with the captain's normal signature. The security footage from inside the hangar showed Rodriguez entering the aircraft alone. No one else approached the aircraft between the time of her entry and when security responded to her screams. The cockpit voice recorder, which had been left installed during the initial investigation, was checked again. It had captured something during those early morning hours. At exactly 2:39 a.m., 12 minutes after Rodriguez boarded and 2 minutes before her screams alerted security, the recorder captured the sound of a pen scratching on paper, followed by a whispered voice that audio analysts could never quite agree upon. Some heard, "I have returned," while others insisted it said, "I never left." The investigation continued for months, expanding to include specialists from various government agencies, aviation experts from around the world, and even physicists trying to determine if some unknown atmospheric or electromagnetic phenomenon could explain the events. Captain Whitfield's family, meanwhile, suffered through a particular kind of torment. Without a body, they could neither properly grieve nor hold on to hope. His wife of 27 years, Catherine, insisted that she felt her husband was still alive somewhere. "I would know if he was gone," she told reporters during the only press conference she ever gave. "Whatever happened in that cockpit, Tom is still out there." 6 months after the incident, with no new evidence and no sign of Captain Whitfield, the official investigation was scaled back. The aircraft remained grounded, too valuable as potential evidence to be returned to service, but too disturbing for any crew to want to fly. And then, exactly 1 year after the incident, on November 8, 2020, air traffic controller Melissa Donovan, who had been on duty during the original event and had since transferred to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, received a routine call from an incoming aircraft requesting landing instructions. She would later tell investigators that she immediately recognized the voice, even before the pilot identified his aircraft. November 77896, requesting approach vectors for runway 11. It was Captain Whitfield's voice. Donovan, stunned, checked her radar screen. There was indeed an aircraft approaching, its transponder identifying it as N77896, the same Airbus A320 that had been involved in the incident a year earlier. The aircraft that, as far as she knew, was still impounded in a hangar in Nebraska. Aircraft identifying as N77896, please verify your information, she managed to respond. That registration is not currently active. Ground, this is Thomas Whitfield aboard N77896, came the reply. Something is wrong with your systems. We are on final approach with minimum fuel. Request immediate landing clearance. By now, Donovan had alerted her supervisor. Radar continued to show the aircraft, now just 15 miles from the airport, but a hurried check confirmed what she already knew. N77896 was still in the hangar in Nebraska. It had not been released, had not been flown, had not been authorized for any movement whatsoever. Whatever was transmitting that transponder code and using Captain Whitfield's voice was not the actual Airbus A320. Aircraft identifying as N77896, we show no flight plan filed for your arrival. Please state your origin and destination, Donovan's supervisor instructed, following protocol for unidentified aircraft. We have been flying for 1 year, 2 days, 17 hours, and 39 minutes. We are nearly home. The radar blip representing the Phantom aircraft continued its approach toward the airport. Alarmingly, no visual confirmation could be made. Tower personnel with binoculars could see nothing in the sector where radar indicated the aircraft should be visible. F-16s were scrambled to intercept, but by the time they reached the coordinates, the radar blip had vanished. No aircraft was found, no wreckage was discovered, no unusual atmospheric conditions were reported. The voice, so eerily similar to Captain Whitfield's, was never heard again. 3 days later, during a routine inspection of the impounded Airbus still secured in the Nebraska hangar, maintenance technician Gabriel Okafor made a disturbing discovery. The aircraft's flight management computer showed that the engines had been running just 64 hours earlier, precisely when the Phantom N77896 had appeared on Minneapolis radar. The fuel gauges, which had previously shown the tanks as nearly empty after the aircraft's unexplained flight, now indicated they were completely dry. The Hobbs meter, which records engine operating time, showed an additional 3 hours and 12 minutes that could not be accounted for. And on the captain's seat, which had been empty for a year, a single gray hair was found. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Thomas Whitfield. The official explanation, if you can call it that, was ultimately documented as unexplained technical anomaly combined with human factors. The case was classified, the aircraft was disassembled, and its parts were never used again in any other aircraft. But those of us who studied the case know that no technical malfunction can explain what happened. The cockpit voice recorder capturing a pilot saying, "I am not alone in this skin," before vanishing into thin air. An aircraft that flies with precision but no human at the controls. The ghostly completion of a signature witnessed by a terrified cleaner. A voice calling from a Phantom aircraft claiming to have been flying for over a year. Perhaps most unsettling is what happened to First Officer Sandra Reeves, who was originally meant to be on that flight with Captain Whitfield. 6 months after the incident, while flying a completely different route for a different airline, she reported hearing Captain Whitfield's voice over the radio during her approach to Denver International Airport. "Sandra, don't let them take you too," the voice reportedly said. "The seams between worlds are weakening." No other pilot or air traffic controller heard the transmission. Reeves retired from flying the following week. The most rational explanation, the one that lets us all continue to board aircraft without crippling fear, is that Captain Whitfield somehow suffered a severe psychological break, managed to fly the aircraft while experiencing a dissociative episode, and then somehow escaped both the aircraft and the airport without being seen by any security cameras or personnel. But that explanation cannot account for the physical evidence. Control inputs made when no one was present, systems operated without human hands, an aircraft that seems to have existed in 2 places at once, and the strange phenomena that continued to occur around N77896 long after Whitfield's disappearance. In 27 years investigating aviation incidents, I've learned that not everything that happens in our skies can be explained by mechanical failures or human error. Sometimes, in the narrow space between what we know and what we fear, something else takes control. Something that perhaps was never meant to interface with our technology or our understanding of physical reality. I no longer fly commercial aircraft. I can't bring myself to sit in a sealed metal tube traveling between worlds anymore. Not since I visited that hangar in Nebraska and saw the flight management computer of N77896 briefly activate on its own, displaying for just a moment a flight plan with an impossible destination. The screen showed origin, Millard, destination, the space between. To this day, no trace of Captain Thomas Whitfield has ever been found. But every year on November 8th, air traffic controllers at random airports throughout the Midwest report brief, unexplained radar contacts with an aircraft broadcasting the identifier N77896. The contacts last only seconds, and no aircraft is ever visually confirmed. And sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, when the boundary between night and day is at its thinnest, controllers report hearing a voice that sounds remarkably like Captain Whitfield's, repeating the same cryptic message. "We are still flying. The seams are giving way. You will all join us eventually." What would you do if you were the air traffic controller who received that final transmission from a phantom aircraft? Would you dismiss it as some sort of elaborate hoax or technical malfunction, or would you consider the possibility that sometimes, in the vast emptiness of our skies, the boundaries between what we understand and what we fear become dangerously thin? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more investigations into aviation mysteries that the authorities would prefer remained buried in classified files.